Hi, everyone, and welcome to our STEMinista live career interview today. My name is Anna Sterner. I'm the Director of Programs at the Michigan Science Center, and I am a co-leader of the STEMinista project. If this is your first time tuning in and perhaps you're not familiar, the STEMinista project is the Michigan Science Center's initiative to reach 4th through 8th grade girls through engaging experiences with STEM and helping them to foster connections with other girls who are interested in STEM so that they can find a group of their peers, but also allowing students to make connections to women who are in STEM careers right now, who are those professionals in the field doing the work and who have paved the path for the next generation of girls and women in STEM careers. Now, I myself am a STEMinista, someone who finds myself in a STEM role. So if you are a STEMinista, just like me, you are someone who is curious, someone who explores the world around them, someone who just has a general interest in experimenting, asking questions, and problem solving the world all around us, no matter what specific STEM topic interests you most. Now, today we are going to be joined by a very special guest, as we saw in our title slide. I have the honor of interviewing Dr. Kelley Meyers, who is the Chief Medical Officer at the Michigan Humane Society. So good evening, Dr. Meyers. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited.
We're excited too. I know that I'm excited because I get to ask you some really cool questions about not just your role as Chief Medical Officer, but about the path you took to get there. But I did a little bit of a spiel about me, so maybe you could give us a little bit of a spiel about you, tell us who you are, where you work, and maybe you could also tell us what gave you your STEM spark, the thing that set you into a career in science.
Yeah, absolutely. So as she said, I am the Chief Medical Officer at Michigan Humane, but that's not where I thought I would be. I started out as a veterinarian in large animal. I grew up on a farm, and so I knew I wanted to be a large animal vet since I was very young. And then just through life changes, I started working as a small animal veterinarian out in Colorado, and then got interested in leadership, and then ultimately ended up in animal welfare with the Michigan Humane Society. So and now I am their Chief Medical Officer. I have always loved math and science since I was a young kid. My dad is a science teacher and a math teacher. So he would always give me special projects at home. I loved school. But I also remember a STEM program when I was in the 6th grade where I was encouraged as a young kid to pursue STEM as a female. And that really, I remember that moment. I still can look back when I was a 6th grader, and I remember that moment when that teacher took the time to kind of pull me aside and say, you've got a special talent in math and science, and you should really pursue a career in STEM.
Wow, I think that's so cool that someone saw that so early on. Now, reminder to everyone who's tuning in live, you can, of course, ask questions to Dr. Meyers in the chat. So if you're tuning in live on Facebook or on our YouTube channel, I've got my eyes on both of those chats. So go ahead, introduce yourself, tell us where you're watching from. But if you would like to know anything about Dr. Meyers' role now or her path to where how she got there, type that in the chat and we will save some time at the end to make sure that we ask those questions from the audience as well. Now, you kind of kicked us off here, but I thought we'd start with something kind of fun. Now, when we put up our title slide here, I think you and I are actually both holding a different animal. This is not the slide I want, but we are both holding an animal in our title slide here. So both obviously animal lovers. I have the Michigan Science Center's retired albino leopard gecko, Pinky. He's one of my favorite animals. But who is the animal that you're holding?
Oh, that's a great question. That is one of the animals that was in our shelter that is already adopted. That was a couple years ago. So that was a shelter animal, but I do have 3 very amazing cats. Squish Fish Patty on a Bun is number 1. And then 2 brothers, Bernard and Fat Louie. So definitely a cat lover. For sure. Love dogs too, and cows and all animals, but we are a cat household right now.
All those names speak to me. I think people like to talk about my cat's name a lot. They think it's a little bit funny, but I think that you probably take the cake here. I know Fat Louie is in one of my favorite movies growing up. That was Princess Diaries. I think that was the name of her cat. But my cat's name is Keyboard, like Keyboard Cat, like the YouTube video. But your cats definitely have a good collection of names, just like mine do. So tell us your cat's name in the chat, everyone. I'd be curious to see if anyone can top that because that's a pretty good one. Now you mentioned about your spark and that you mentioned that your spark was a teacher or a role model in your life that kind of saw that spark in you even before you maybe saw it in yourself. And I know that sometimes when we're young, we don't always think of becoming what we end up being. So when I was young, I think my spark came from nature. I really just enjoyed being outside. I loved animals, specifically wildlife. I wasn't so into pets when I was a kid, but I was very into the idea of like ocean animals. And I thought I would be a marine biologist. That didn't end up being the case. I'm only a little bit sad about it. But could you tell us, what did you want to be when you were growing up? Did you always know you'd want to be the chief medical officer at Michigan Humane?
Oh, yeah, no. I was very introverted when I was a kid. And so people, not so much, but it's so funny as you grow in your career and you get introduced to different experiences. And that happened to me. And so I very much enjoy being around people and meeting people. And so leadership was very exciting for me, which is how I ended up as the chief medical officer, is I actually now lead doctors. But when I was a kid, growing up on the farm, I was part of 4-H, and we used to have a veterinarian that would come to the farm and treat the animals. And that was so inspiring to me, and talking with him about his job and what he did really was what pushed me towards becoming a veterinarian. And then being around animals, just absolutely adore animals. But even starting vet school, after college, going into vet school, I was sure I was going to be a large animal vet working in a private practice. And I've done so many things in my career. That's the cool part about veterinary medicine, is it's such a versatile career. You can do so many different things with it, all based in STEM, of course, but you could end up being a leader. You can work for the government. You can work in an animal shelter or private practice. You can work on Plum Island, learning about different diseases. So there's lots of things that you can do as a veterinarian.
Cool. Now, so speaking about being a veterinarian, I know that I really like a lot of the TV shows that are out now about various animal doctors from around the country. I think that it's just truly so cool to see like that insider perspective and get to see all the different animals that they get to treat, especially when most of us only have things like cats or dogs or maybe fish at home. But could you tell us from your perspective, what is the daily life of a vet like? So if you had to maybe think about what they show on TV, is that a good depiction or is it not a very good depiction? What is a general day-to-day life like for a vet?
Yeah, so I think it depends on what the vet is doing, right? So like, let's take Dr. Poole. So I actually know Dr. Poole. I know, crazy, right? I actually stayed in his house as a veterinary student and did one of my externships with him. So he is famous, but he's just a regular guy, right?
I am incredibly jealous. That is one of my favorite TV shows.
Yeah, so I mean, that show does depict some aspects. He's a mixed animal practitioner, so that would be a typical mixed animal practice. But yeah, so veterinarians generally will see appointments, they'll see a client owning animal, they'll do exams, and they could see anything from an ear infection to diabetes to an animal that maybe got hit by a car or ate something it shouldn't. They might spend a day in surgery. So foreign bodies, like if an animal eats something it shouldn't, going in and removing that. So it really depends. Every day is different. You might spend an hour talking with a client about their pet and a plan for their pet and creating that plan for them. I'm really lucky because I work at a humane society where we also have shelter animals that don't have parents. And so those veterinarians do the same thing, but without a client. So they actually have to be detectives. They have to figure out what's going on with the animal. Are they in pain? Are they suffering from something? Is there something wrong? So they have to use all their senses, their hands, their eyes, their ears, to see what's going on with the pet. So they might do that with the animals that are coming into the shelter. They also have to do spay and neuter with those animals. So all kinds of different things, just depending on the role of the veterinarian.
That's such an interesting perspective. I love the idea of playing detective for the sake of helping animals. It's such an, it uses the same skills, but for such a different purpose. I love that. Could you tell us, what do you generally like best about working with animals or being a veterinarian? What is your favorite part?
Oh, I'm going to say two things. I'm not going to pick one favorite thing. I think for me, it is about the challenge of solving complex problems. Like I absolutely love that. Every day is a different problem that you have to solve. Diabetes is a disease that doesn't have a really great easy answer. And so trying to solve the problem for that pet and that family. And then the other thing is people. A lot of people think veterinarians don't have to deal with people, but it's actually the opposite. Really building relationships with people to help solve those problems and be collaborative to get as many people involved in the solution as possible.
So besides being a veterinarian, could you tell us what are other careers that, if maybe you don't choose to be a veterinarian, what other types of careers are available that are people you work with, people who help you to solve those problems?
Well, that's a great question. So we have veterinary technicians that are licensed and help with the medicine. We have vet assistants. We have customer service representatives. We have adoption counselors. We have people that clean kennels. And then when you think about like maintenance and facilities and custodians, we have all of those folks that help keep our shelters and our clinics running. And then we have our admin office. So we have leaders and managers and marketing folks and development folks and people that help raise money. We have our president and CEO. We have our chief operations officer. So lots of different roles just within our organization and all of that is to help animals, both those that have an owner and those that don't have an owner.
So it sounds like the binding factor between all of you is that you all just love being around animals and helping the animals that you see.
The animals and the family is keeping the family and the animal together. Yeah, that bond between people and animals is so important and something that we are passionate about. In our mission statement at Michigan Humane is save lives. And we did that consciously. We didn't put save animal lives because people's lives are so connected to animals. And that's so important for us as an organization to make sure that people understand that we're saving everybody's life, animals and people.
Talking about all these different people who interact with the animals at your shelters, this is totally sidetracked, but something I've always been curious about is I have adopted many animals from shelters over the years. Actually, my cat Keyboard came with the name Keyboard, and I thought it was the most adorable name. And I love the YouTube videos, so I totally chose to keep it. But sometimes they've got really funky names. Sometimes they got really cute names. Who gets to pick the names?
That's a great question. So the staff get to pick the name. So a lot of times they'll be, interacting with the animal and they'll just come up with this fancy name. So I sometimes foster kittens, especially. So sometimes kittens come in really tiny. So they need to be bottle fed. Maybe they lost their mom. And so we'll raise them. So us as staff members will sometimes take them home and raise them. And so I had these little kittens and we named them after Avatar characters. So like Appa and Korra. And so some of these great character names. So they got adopted with those names. So sometimes those animals get to keep those names and sometimes the owners choose different names. We don't care as long as they have a loving family.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone you foster kittens. Would you recommend fostering kittens to anyone who's maybe looking to help out?
Absolutely. All shelters need great fosters and it's such a great project, especially for a family that's maybe has a kid that's interested in getting into veterinary medicine. It's a great way to learn how to care for an animal. And the foster program will show you what to do, and they won't start you out with probably a teeny tiny bottle baby. They'll probably start you out with an older kitten and then work your way towards the more challenging kittens. But it's great. Yeah, and it's so fun too, like you get the experience of having the babies, but then you get to see them get adopted into new homes. And it's so great. The experience is wonderful.
I follow a lot of kitten foster Instagram accounts. And if no one watching, if you don't follow one yet, I highly recommend them. They are adorable. They're clearly a lot of work, but they are very, very cute. And it looks like it's really worth it, especially when you see them go to a new home.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you look through my phone, it's mostly my foster kitten, a couple pictures of my children, but mostly my foster kitten.
I'm sure they love that.
Absolutely.
That's so cool. So you touched on this a little bit, especially talking about that's a good way to kind of get your feet wet in animal care. But if someone is interested in becoming a vet, if one of the young girls watching is interested in pursuing a career as a vet, what is a really good way to get started, especially at a pretty young age where you're maybe not necessarily college aged yet, but what could you do even before then?
If you have a pet at home, when that pet needs to go to the vet, which is every year, going with your parents and asking the veterinarian to explain what it's like to be a veterinarian, I think is a great way, because then you're learning about what it means to be a veterinarian, and then you're also learning how to care for your own pet. And that is perfect. That's a great way to get started. The next step would be maybe to go to a shelter and volunteer. If you're under 18, usually you have to go with your parent. So getting your parents involved to help. But then, you might have to do things like wash dishes and clean up, but then you're around animals and you're understanding, and then you get that exposure. People get to know you, and then you start to get your foot in the door somewhere. As you get older, then getting a job and working for a veterinarian is another great way.
So you talked about also mentorship, about being in science when you were young, especially being raised by someone who was already a science teacher, that someone recognized that spark in you really early. So could you talk a little more about the power of mentorship? Is there anyone that you've seen as a mentor in your career?
Oh, so many mentors, right? They're everywhere. If you really open your eyes, people are so willing to help teach and guide you, but you have to use your voice and say that you're interested. And I think that that's really important, because I think sometimes we sit back and we're not sure if that's a good place to go or a good direction, or maybe you think you don't have good enough grades. So I will tell you, didn't have the best grades growing up. I'm stubborn and determined. So that helped me be successful. But you just have to ask the questions and not be afraid to talk to folks. I think that that's probably the biggest thing. But there are lots of people that are willing to help.
Well, you yourself are obviously a very powerful mentor in this field. I know you work with a lot of people who are young in their career, and you're now in leadership as chief medical officer there. So I know that a lot of people obviously view you as a mentor. And you, of course, are a STEMinista role model. And we are so thrilled to have you as part of our database, connecting with girls through opportunities like this, or maybe even getting a chance to see them at the Science Center. But could you talk about why is that work important to you? Why do you feel like it's important to be a role model?
Yeah, because I think back on my career and just how many people helped me get where I am here today. And if there is any chance that I could give that to someone else, now that I am a chief medical officer, I would love to do that. So if that means having people email me or spend time with me or shadow me, the more people that get interested in veterinary medicine, the better. It is a career that I have never, ever wondered if I would have a job, and there is such a shortage right now, so we need lots and lots and lots of veterinarians. So I need to do my part to help encourage young kids, for sure.
So general veterinary medicine aside, if you were giving advice to young girls who are just interested in being a part of the science community, no matter what facet that is, what is like the one top piece of advice you think you would give them?
Ask questions and explore, right? I think that's the biggest thing. That's what science is about, is asking that next question. Why is the grass green? Why does the grass grow where it grows, right? Like just asking that next question. That's going to make you a fantastic scientist.
Sounds like you and I grew up very much the same, and hopefully your dad was as patient as my dad, because I know I was full of questions all the time. But why? But how? I just always had to know the next thing, and I know it drove everyone bonkers, but I think it got me to where I am now. I ask questions of people live on the internet, so it clearly worked for me.
It's fantastic. Yes, absolutely. My dad was a big part of my science exploration as a kid, and math too. Yeah,
mine as well. Mine was not a science teacher, but he was an engineer, and so he was definitely the person telling you, take it apart. Who cares if you break it? We'll get another one, or we'll fix it. We'll figure it out. Don't even worry about it. And I know that not everyone has that experience, but I highly recommend it. Asking questions, don't be afraid to break things, take things apart, learn to put them back together, I think is a really important lesson, is just being curious.
Absolutely. I agree.
So reminder to everyone out in the chat, if you have any questions for Dr. Meyers, we are closing out on some of our questions here, but if you have any that you would like to ask about her role as a veterinarian or what her day-to-day life is like, let us know in the chat. I do have a couple that I wanted to ask before we head out. These ones are kind of fun, but things that I'm definitely curious about, and I'm sure you have a good answer. I know that you said that you've worked as a livestock vet. You've also worked for pets and things like that. So could you tell me what is the largest animal and what is the smallest animal that you've ever cared for, whether that was in school or in your career?
Oh, that's a good question. The largest animal was a giant draft horse that I'm pretty sure I was looking at their knees. So the horse is just standing there like a normal horse. It was just this giant draft horse. So that's probably the biggest. The smallest animal, probably a baby gecko. No, chameleon, sorry, baby chameleon. So I used to work for Banfield, who's connected to PetSmart. And so we would occasionally get these little exotic animals that maybe weren't feeling well. And so it was a little baby chameleon. It wasn't very big at all. Yeah. And one time I got to help with a cheetah at a zoo. Like that was probably the coolest animal I've ever to help with. I mean, I didn't do much but watch, but yeah, it was pretty cool.
Just being within arm's reach of a cheetah, I think I could quit right then. That's so cool.
Yeah, they were doing artificial insemination on the cheetah. This was at the zoo back where I grew up, and they anesthetized it to do the procedure. And so we were all sitting there waiting for it to wake up. And I've never seen so many people move faster when that cheetah just twitched a little bit, like scattered. It was so fun. So yeah, everybody was fine, but yeah, that was probably. I
guess you have a lot more scale of animals than I have, but seeing one for the first time, are cheetahs up close? Are they larger or smaller than you anticipated?
Cheetahs actually aren't huge cats, so it was smaller than I actually thought. I mean, they're big cats, you know, much bigger than a house cat, but not as big as you would maybe think they would be. Yeah, they're pretty agile and fairly medium sized, I would say.
Well, I know how far my cat can jump, and she's only like 8 pounds. So I can only imagine how quickly a cheetah could get to you. And so I think I would also be one of those people in the room who's like, did it move? Okay.
Exactly.
So cool. So my next question is maybe on the opposite side of things, but there has to be challenges that come with being a vet, days that are harder than others. But is there one challenge or what is the biggest challenge that people may not realize is part of being a vet?
Oh, that's a really good question. You know, I talk a lot about these complex problems that we have to solve sometimes, like a diabetic that maybe isn't responding to insulin. I think that's probably the hardest is when you can't quickly solve a problem for a pet or for a family. You want to so bad. You have all of this education and all of this time that you spent becoming a veterinarian and not being able to solve people's problems, I think is probably the most difficult, for sure.
Yeah, everyone loves their pets. I can only imagine, especially if you're at the vet, right? That means that you truly love your vet because we all know that, or you love your pet because going to the vet, we all know is pretty expensive if you've ever taken yours there, but it's years of education and life-saving. I know I couldn't live without my cat.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're closing out to the end here. Again, if you have any last questions, type them in the chat. But if people think of ways that they'd like to connect with you later, they think of questions after the fact, how can students get in contact with you, Dr. Meyers?
That's a great question. So I'm fine with people emailing me at my work or connecting via LinkedIn is another way. Those are probably the biggest channels for me.
So if you're interested in staying in contact with Dr. Meyers, if you think of any questions, of course, you can reach out through the STEMinista project. If you follow us on Facebook or Instagram, you can, of course, reach out to us any way you'd like. But also Dr. Meyers' email address is listed up here on the slide as well. So feel free to send her an email. I know that you are very well connected in your field as well, that if maybe you don't have an answer, there may be other people in your field who would be willing to act as a connection to some of these young girls who are just interested in learning more about your field and the work that you do.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Meyers, for being here. This was really interesting. I learned a lot, and thank you for sharing a little bit about your personal life and your pets with us as well. It was really cool to see. We don't always get that side of things here, but thank you everyone for tuning in live. Please definitely stay tuned with the STEMinista project. We have lots of really exciting announcements coming out soon. We've got a few projects that we are looking to have students take part in, and all of those announcements will go out on our various social media channels. But you can also learn more by visiting the Michigan Science Center's website as well. So thank you, Dr. Meyers. It was a pleasure, and we will see you soon.
Great. Thanks, everyone.